Hey guys, Scott here. Today I want to talk about base regression for generators in Dead by Daylight. This was based off of a Reddit thread I've seen, as is 90% of my videos lately for some reason. But I do think it's a good discussion, and I think I actually have a solution that is really, really simple. And I don't even think I've seen anyone like discuss this. So I wanted to go over what my suggestion was for fixing this. But first, let me go over what the actual, argument being made is. And it's basically that because generator regression has kind of been nerfed recently, a lot of the main meta regression perks have been fairly significantly nerfed. I'm not going to lie. It's making people more stressed out, and we need some increase to the base regression of the game because right now it feels like people rely on slowdown perks. And I will agree with that to some extent. I do think Dead by Daylight is balanced around having at least a slowdown perk or two. It actually truly is. If I am playing a mid-tier killer and I'm running no slowdown perks due to like Chaos Shuffle or something, I am feeling pretty stressed most of the game. So the game sadly is balanced around these perks. The problem is when you nerf these perks, it leaves people with this sort of void where now they can't run 5 perks to make up for the 4 slowdowns they were using. So people turn to hopefully base regression being better. And base regression has been buffed fairly recently. It used to be 2.5% of the generator, and it would stop regressing as soon as the survivor touches it. Now it's 5% regression when you kick it, and the survivor has to repair it for 5% before it actually loses its regression status effect again. So there have been small tweaks to that, and those have been really nice and welcome and really good changes, in my opinion. The problem is, though, a lot of people end up suggesting that we have some sort of base kit slowdown or something like that, or we buff the base regression more. Like these blanket changes that will definitely make things feel better for killer, but it unfortunately doesn't really account for human nature. There's always this common sentiment every time. If the regression perks, which increase the rate at which gens regress, were adjusted to fit the change, and we had this base kit regression in the game now, you would see a shift away from everyone running for slowdown perks because, let's be real, no one logs on to play Generator Defense Simulator. This is the mindset I see every time when people ask for these kinds of changes to generator regression. Every time I see this exact example. And the problem with that is you can't do that. You can't assume you'd see everyone shift away from 4 slowdown perks. What will happen is a couple of people will stop feeling as pressured. Now they think, oh, I only need 3 slowdowns now. I can put on a chase perk or something like that. But the truth is, people will still run 4 slowdowns, and now they have even more slowdown just for free. So you can't rely on the good graces of the community to just not want to use the best things they can use. It's like telling survivors, hey, you shouldn't use exhaustion perks. You don't really need those. People are still going to run them. Like, there's just no reason to assume people will not still use these perks. And again, like I said, the amount of slowdown perks will probably go down a little bit, but you can't allow for the possibility for someone to benefit from these new regression changes and still have the same 4 slowdowns. That is when it becomes an absolute nightmare to go against. And the reason why these blanket changes are so dangerous, it boils down to the main flaw here. It's that the game is too imbalanced from weakest killer to strongest killer to make any blanket changes to things like that. Things like base kit ruined or base kit any regression buffs at all. You can't do it because it's a game where Freddy and Trapper exist and Nurse and Blight exist. These are 2 killers and 2 groups of killers that are in such wildly different balanced categories that you cannot make any blanket changes to the game. If you make more regression, then you make Nurse and Blight stupid. If you make the regression, a very minor amount, then it doesn't really do anything to help the weaker killers. So you can't make these blanket changes. So what's the actual solution? I proposed a couple of them. The first one I did was the whole trial warm-up thing where, the generators go much slower at the start of the match until you get into a chase. So these weaker killers without map control are able to get into a chase, and the better killers like Blight or Nurse or Billy, they can get into a chase really fast. They don't really get affected by this at all because they start a chase within 10 seconds of the match starting, so it doesn't really matter. But as the game has progressed, even this is not ironclad anymore because there's a lot of killers in the game that have extremely good chase powers but no map control. So it's not like you need to give a Pyramid Head a huge advantage in the start. Pyramid Head's a pretty decent killer. He doesn't need to have that advantage at the start. Despite having no map control, his chase is pretty damn good. So that's the problem with that. So in my opinion, the simplest, really easy solution is we just make a base regression value per killer. Just like how when you go to a killer bio and you see every killer has their height and, tear radius listed, you can just add another stat there. We'll call it like wrath or something, or viciousness, or whatever you want to call it. Doesn't matter. You can just have a stat there that would just look something like this. It'd be right next to all the other visible stats. And I'm explaining what these numbers here are. It would be a percent followed by a decimal of some kind. So it would be the base regression when you kick a generator, followed by the amount of generator charges lost per second. The current values right now default are 5% and 1 charge per second. So on the very strong killers like Hillbilly that have insane map pressure that can run around and kick generators like it's their job, you would have probably a slightly weaker version of that. Now, if you had a much weaker killer like, Freddy or Trapper or Pig, whatever, any of the weaker killers, you can have a much higher value there. You can have 8% on kick and 2 charges a second instead of 1. And I don't think that would make those killers overpowered under any circumstances whatsoever. It would actually make them just a bit more fair. This is such an easy solution because it adjusts for the fact that you can't make blanket changes to the game while addressing that certain killers don't perform as well as others. And so if we take that into account, we realize that we don't give Nurse any buffs of any kind. In fact, maybe we even nerf regression on her a little bit. But for the weaker killers, we significantly buff it, and it doesn't unfairly affect anybody. Then we have a very simple solution that's very easy to do. It fits right there in the UI. I can't think of a single downside to doing this, except one, which is we would need the developers to know which killers need the weaker regression and which killers need the stronger regression, which means they need to know essentially a rough tier list of the actual killers in DBD. And as we know, because they base things a lot on data, they might think, oh, Skull Merchant's the best killer in the game. Look at her kill rate. Ooh, Nurse sucks. She has a 47% kill rate. And they might say, well, we need to buff Nurse and stuff like that. So that is the one issue. However, they do have these consultants that I'm willing to bet can give them a slight nudge in the right direction. So with that, I'm not super worried. There might be a couple of outliers of stupid things, but for the most part, I have faith that with a little bit of help, they can get these values right. And again, they wouldn't be drastic. You're not going to have someone with 20% base regression, and you're not going to have Nurse with 0 regression. It's going to be plus or minus a few percent here to help out and make it feel like you're getting like half another perk if you're a weaker killer, and you're losing half a perk if you're a very strong top tier killer. So that's the idea. Have a base kit stat called Wrath that is attached to every killer, and have them have unique modifier values relative to their overall strength and map control and ability to regress generators in the match. And I think we'd have a scenario where base kit regression is in a very good spot, and people would not have to rely on these slowdowns as much. But if they did, it would be on the weaker killers that need it anyway. And if they did it on the stronger killers, well, they wouldn't really benefit from the system at all. So it seems to be pretty foolproof. I'm curious to hear what you guys think about this, but that's going to be it. Thank you so much for watching.